Joining us now is Gutowski. He's a firearms policy reporter for the Washington Free Beacon, who was at the rally and has been all over this story. Stephen, we just showed video of that big gun rally in Virginia last month. You were there, tens of thousands of armed citizens protesting peacefully. Today is what many are calling the final piece in a long battle between those gun owners and Virginia Democrats. Where do you see this going?
Well, the House Committee on Public Safety has now passed the assault weapons ban, which also includes confiscation of ammunition magazines which hold more than 12 rounds, essentially banning their possession outright. And so now it will go to the full House for a vote. They're sort of doing this right at the cutoff for new legislation, so it's not clear if they have the votes to pass the House or not. If it does, it'll face an even stiffer resistance in the Senate, where Democrats only have a 2-vote majority, and you've already had one Democratic senator speak out against proposals like this, saying he won't support them. So it's not clear yet if this will end up passing. It may also be further moderated or watered down, as it just was in committee once it actually reaches floor votes. So it still has a long way to go before you get to final passage, if it can pass at all. Of course, there's still several other proposals that the Senate has already passed, which seem very likely to become law.
And you had mentioned this bill being watered down, which would not require current owners of assault weapons to turn them in or register them with state police, as some earlier proposals required. Democrats have called that a compromise. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, certainly this bill is less radical than what the governor had been pushing for the last year or so, starting back in January 2019, which was essentially confiscation of all AR-15s and similar rifles, which would mean, millions of firearms being illegal to possess, even if you already legally purchased them. So it's certainly not as radical as that, but I think gun rights proponents are still clearly unsatisfied with what it actually is.
We've been following this story, of course, even before the peaceful rally that happened in Virginia at the Capitol. We had heard from sheriffs who said that they wouldn't even be enforcing these laws in their own counties if this were to be the case. So how effective do you think these laws would end up being if, to say, they were to be passed?
Well, I mean, you're certainly going to have some form of universal background check law get passed, although the Senate version doesn't apply to transfers, only to sales. You're going to have a red flag bill get passed into law. You're going to have a 1 gun a month limit, which has an exception for people with concealed carry licenses. And you're going to have an expansion of what localities where they can declare gun-free zones. So, even if this assault weapons ban doesn't pass, you're still going to have that tension between localities that have declared themselves sanctuaries, as well as sheriffs and Commonwealth attorneys who said they won't enforce these sorts of laws. Like the red flag bill, for instance, is very controversial and likely to pass, more likely to pass than the assault weapons ban. So you're still going to have that tension, and really it'll probably take years to see how that all plays out inside the state. That's sort of a long game thing. What's the Democratic leadership in the legislature going to do, or in the governor's mansion, about these local law enforcement agencies or officials who won't, who believe these laws are unconstitutional and won't enforce them? How's that going to work? It's unclear.
Needless to say, we will be seeing some changes. So we have to ask, do you think that this is sort of a test case going on in Virginia for what lawmakers might want to see throughout the nation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the Democratic Party has moved much further left on this issue over the last, say, 4 to 6 years than they had been over the last several decades, going back to the 90s, because it had long been viewed as a political loser for them. And for whatever reason, they've determined that it's not anymore. And so here's where, we see whether it really is. Clearly, the backlash has been intense within Virginia. That protest is probably the largest pro-gun protest in the last several decades, and probably the largest protest of any sort or rally of any sort in Richmond in decades.
A lot of people.
Certainly,
yeah,
there's a lot of grassroots opposition to this. Whether or not that translates at the polls, I think, is what's going to be the ultimate test of how this new path for Democrats on gun control, where they've gone very far left on the issue, is viable or not.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. Stephen Gutowski, he's a firearms policy reporter for the Washington Free Beacon. Thanks so much.